Grief sucks. Hi, and welcome back to Engineering ADHD, the channel where we try to make sense of this crazy thing called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder through the eyes of an engineer. Today we are looking at ADHD and grief. As we have talked about on many occasions before, there are very few aspects of life that ADHD doesn't enhance, degrade, modify, and affect in some way. And grief is no different to this. So the question then becomes, what effect does ADHD have on grief? What can we do about it? And what are the warning signs to look for? And how do we get out of the emotional spiral that is grief? This video is probably going to have a lot of cuts to it. It's probably going to be one of the harder ones for me to get through. So I apologize for all the jump cuts, but it needs to be done. It is very important to acknowledge that stress and grief are linked. I've recently done a video on ADHD and stress. I would recommend that you watch that video in conjunction with this video, since the two very much interplay with each other. If you're in a grieving situation or you're in a grief cycle, chances are this is a stressful situation, and the same things that happen during stress are going to happen during grief. And it's very important to identify them and see the downward cycle and figure out how to break it. So if you're a viewer of this channel, you know that I posted a video, the last video, Nope, where I was pretty sure I was going to lose my cat. And well, it turns out I did have to put Trainer down. Trainer has been my cat, my confidant, my solace, and above all, my friend for 16 years. This obviously has a huge emotional toll on neurotypical and neuro-atypical people. It really does not matter which side of the fence you are on. You are going to have a grief cycle when you lose something that you have been bonded to for 16 years. With ADHD, one of the big things you're going to experience in a grief cycle is an unprecedented level of emotion. I know this from personal experience over the last couple of weeks. I knew this before then, though. I knew that emotional dysregulation is very much a thing for an ADHD mind. We tend to feel emotions and empathy much deeper than most neurotypicals do. This is a generalization. I know there are some extremely empathetic neurotypical people out there. I'm not taking anything away from people who don't have ADHD. It's just more prevalent in people who have ADHD. So with that in mind, we tend to feel emotions much deeper, much more powerful, and much quicker than a neurotypical brain would. This is often seen when we fall in love or when we meet somebody that we care about. To them, it's only been a couple of weeks, but to us, the emotions have been heightened that entire time. So it can result in us often being the first ones to say, I love you in a relationship. Feeling a relationship is much deeper than the other person in the relationship does. This is a whole nother video. We'll talk about this one on another day. But yeah, ADHD in relationships is a fun concept. So for me, with the grief cycle, it's important to note that it wasn't on its own. It was standing on the shoulders of the stress of my close family member with stage 4 cancer. It was standing on the shoulders of SARS-CoV-2 and how that is completely just changing everything about being a human right now. And life is not the same, and it's never going to be the same. So there was a significant amount of stress that this was standing on top of, and that magnifies it. So I don't know if in a normal time the grief cycle would have been as deep as it was this time, but I have to believe it would. Losing Trainer was not easy on me, and it shouldn't have been. It should have been a hard thing to deal with. One of the things that is really going to come into play with your ADHD and a grief cycle or a stress cycle is the emotional dysregulation. You're going to be feeling emotions at a level that, well, I wasn't aware I could feel before I went through this grief cycle. I didn't know that the hole went that far down. So it's important to note that what you're feeling, while valid, while completely and totally perfectly normal and valid, may be at a magnitude that's a little different than everybody else. And this can affect our behavior, this can affect our reactions, this can affect every aspect of our lives, and can impact the relationships that we have. So it becomes very important to note when our emotional response is at a delta from a normal. And it's important to be able to talk to the people that we love and the people that love us about why it's at that delta and how they can help us get through it. Another big piece for this is personal experience aside from ADHD can create a difference in opinion on what a normal or positive or expected emotional reaction to a grief situation or a stress situation is. I'll give you an example. When I took time off because I knew trainer was going to pass away, I took 5 days off. And a friend of mine at work said 5 days seems excessive for a cat. Now, there are people who think that cats are just pets, and there are people who think that cats are family. I'm definitely in the latter group. Cats are family. Anything that's been alive and part of my life for 16 years is a first-party member of my family. There's no doubt in my mind for that. Now, this person had no ill intent. This person wants nothing but the best for me, and my first reaction was to go to a place of aggression. This might be, as we've talked about before, the defective AOC, right? And not having the mental capacity necessarily to process with CBT, to understand that my reactions might be ADHD and it might not be me. I was a bit aggressive in the response in that moment, and I don't feel it was unwarranted, but I walked away with the feeling that we have to be cognizant that everyone who is part of our life, that we love, that loves us, even friends and acquaintances, generally everybody wants the best for us. Nobody is setting out to do ill wishes or trying to piss us off. I've had an interesting rule in my relationships in my life. If I say something to you, and it can be taken two ways, and one of them pisses you off, I meant the other one. It's very true, I think, for everybody. I think most people don't walk into a conversation with the purpose of setting somebody off. Tied in with that unprecedented level of emotion, the next thing that you can expect to experience during a grieving cycle as someone with a neuro-atypical brain is hyperfocus. And this is our old friend and double-edged sword. And in this particular instance, this will not be your friend. Your brain is going to want to try to focus on the problem. It's going to want to try to focus on what you're feeling and the incident that's going on and the loss of the person or the pet or the loss in general. I don't think in this situation, extra attention to a situation you can do nothing about is productive in any way. And I'm fairly certain it's mentally unhealthy. Again, not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, just an engineer with ADHD. If somebody out there has a differing opinion and they're a little more familiar with this, comments down below. Love to talk to everyone. But you're going to want to try to focus on this, and you need to break that focus, which is generally the exact opposite of what an ADHD person is trying to do all the time. We're trying to control our focus, we're trying to direct it to where we want it to go, or we're trying to generate focus. Those are the two main things that someone with ADHD is constantly battling with. In a grief situation, it is perfectly normal to feel depression. It is perfectly normal to feel sadness. It is perfectly normal to be anxious. That is a normal response to a grief-based stimulus. The thing that we have to understand is the magnitude that we're feeling it what's actually going on, or is this emotional dysregulation? I will give some strategies later on that I have used to deal with it recently. I feel kind of weird doing this video because I don't really have any wisdom to offer. I've lost people throughout my life, sure. I've lost people who were close to me throughout my life, sure. I think this is the first actual grief cycle I've gone through as an adult. Most of them were when I was a child. I lost both my grandparents as an adult, but to be perfectly honest, the relationship with them wasn't that close. The biggest part of the grief cycle with that one was watching my dad go through the grief cycle was very stressful for me. This was different. This was vastly, vastly different to anything I have dealt with before. So take what I say with a grain of salt. This is my experience, and this is from one particular situation. Now, when you are in a hyperfocus state, and it is hyperfocusing on something you do not want to hyperfocus on, getting your brain out of that situation can be fun, let's say. So you need to find something that you can dive into. You need to find a passion. You need to find something that will pull you away from where you are. For me, my great escape was making. And it wasn't just, go into my lab and start building stuff. It wasn't that simple. It needed to be something that related to this situation. So I started building an urn for Trainer. Something that stylistically was very me and my wife. That would bring the good memories of Trainer back every time we look at it. But that helped me momentarily escape from the thought process of I'm losing my cat, which was a downward spiral I didn't need to be in. Please note, making is not the answer for everyone. It's just mine. The answer for you is going to be uniquely you. It's going to be something that has been with you forever and something that you are passionate about and a way that you have done it in the past to break yourself out. It is not uncommon for the standard ways that we would normally work with this and the ones that maybe work with stress not to be powerful enough in a grief cycle situation. Be prepared to ramp it up, right? Or find a way to integrate what your passion, what your hobby, what your distraction is to the current situation. I feel, again, not a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a therapist, but I feel that because I was able to do a project that was related to Trainer and was related to Trainer's passing, that it helped me process through the emotions faster, which was kind of a blessing, very much a blessing. But again, your answer is going to be different than mine. If you go through this and you find an answer that works for you, or you find something that is awesome, or you've been through this before, comments down below. Let everyone know what we have found that works, because that is the most important part of this equation, is sharing the information that we have experienced. It allows professionals to look back at these videos, to read the comments, and to gain a bigger insight into an ADHD mind that they wouldn't normally be able to see if they do not have ADHD. The third thing that you can definitely expect to experience during a grief cycle as someone with ADHD, and probably somebody who doesn't have it to a certain degree, is isolation. At the best of times, ADHD can make us feel like we're alone. ADHD can make us feel like there's no one out there who understands the struggle, understands how much work we're putting into normal activities. And we've all experienced it. We've all been there many, many times. But in this case, it's a lie. What you are going through is not unique. There are hundreds of thousands of other ADHD people going through it as well. It can feel isolating because the level of emotions, people around us, the people who love us, our partners, our family, it can feel like they don't get it. And let's be honest, they don't. They can't. It's unfair for us to expect them to. If you haven't lived in an ADHD brain, you can't possibly understand an ADHD brain. It's that simple. I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just being realistic. The people who don't have executive dysfunction, the people who don't have emotional dysregulation, the people who have a functional AOC, the people who don't suffer from rejection sensitivity can't understand what those are on a first order basis. Now you can explain it to them, and they can do all the research they want, and they can have a cognizant awareness of it. But until you've experienced it, it's never 100% of an opinion. And that can make you feel very isolated. You have to understand it's making them stressed and isolated too. The people that love us are watching us spiral. They're watching us be depressed, they're watching us get angry, and they're watching us shut down. And that is incredibly stressful for them too. In these moments, it is very, very important to partner with people and understand they want what's best for us, and be kind both to yourself and to them. Understand that their reactions are being tainted by a grief cycle too. Everybody just needs to get through this together. And at the other end, it is once again, and I've said it a dozen times in this video, very important to understand that the people who love us want nothing but the best for us. It can often be difficult to see that, and this can put a lot of stress on relationships. Again, the technique that I use with meditation that I'll talk about in a few minutes really helped me to understand the delta between the emotions I'm actually having and the level I'm feeling them at. When I understood that delta, I could then use the cognitive behavioral therapy to overcome the deficits of the defective AOC, give myself those couple moments, and understand if a reaction is appropriate for a situation. That sounds so easy when you say it, doesn't it? It's not. And the last piece that you are going to experience as someone with ADHD going through grief cycle, at least what I experienced, is something I call emotional exhaustion. Now, this term has gained a lot of momentum as SARS-CoV-2 has systematically redesigned our world. But emotional exhaustion, from an ADHD point of view, in my opinion, has existed long before this virus had a name, or long before we even knew it existed. And what I refer to as emotional exhaustion is when you know that if you let yourself feel, if you let yourself dive into emotion, it's just going to be this huge ball of negative emotion, depression, rage, anxiety, and you just can't take feeling anymore. So you go numb, or at least I do. And if you do the same thing, let me know in the comments down below. This might buy you a brief period of solace in the storm, but you're not processing any emotion, so you're not going to get any better. I'm not even sure that pause and that numbness lets you recharge in any way, but at the end of the day, we need to fight that emotional exhaustion. We need to be willing to feel what we're feeling. We need to understand that the emotions we're feeling are normal, 100% normal. You're supposed to be upset. You're supposed to be angry. You're supposed to go through the 7 stages of grief like everybody else does. The speed at which people go through them, completely unique. I'm not even sure it has anything to do with ADHD, but it's just a completely unique process. It's important to understand that all of this is normal. All of this is 100% the way that it should be. The magnitude of those emotions, and that might be a little off. Now, obviously, when you're in a grief cycle and you're emotionally exhausted, something small happens. You are going to have a reaction. And occasionally, for us, that reaction is way over the top. When the reactions become way over the top, the problem is that now starts to stress the relationships that we have. It starts to cause friction in interpersonal relationships, and this can be very destructive, especially if the person that the relationship is with is going through a grief cycle as well. And this is where what I said before about being kind to yourself and being kind to the people around you is very, very important. Because you need to end this isolation, you need to partner with people, you need to get back out, and you need to talk to someone. And if you're constantly blowing up over little things, that can be very difficult. Now, the ending of the isolation is different for every person, and it's different for every grieving cycle. For some people, talking to your partner might be enough. Maybe hanging out with friends and remembering the positive side of whatever you just lost might be enough. For other people, and there should be absolutely no stigma around this, talking to a therapist might be beneficial. I don't say you should talk to a therapist because I believe that you're so screwed up that only a professional can help. No. I understand that mental situations happen. And quite often, talking to somebody who can understand what you're going through, talking to somebody who understands the grief cycle, and talking to somebody who's completely unrelated to this situation can be very beneficial. So please, if you need to, reach out to a therapist, reach out to a psychologist, reach out to a psychiatrist. There should be no stigma about this in any way. To me, it is looking down on somebody for going to see a psychiatrist is kind of like looking down on a cancer patient for getting chemo. And you're talking about one of the normal ways of dealing with a situation. What can we do about all this? For me, with everything ADHD, you've heard me say it a bunch of times, One of the biggest things is to understand where our brain is and where it should be, and find the delta between those two. And when you know that, then you can make steps forward. The other piece of this is the people around us need to understand that there is a delta and what that actually means. So if you haven't already, sit down with your loved ones, maybe not in the middle of a grief cycle, but before, at some point, and explain to them how your brain works and how you process things and what you're feeling. If you're in the middle of the grief cycle, obviously be very transparent with the people around you about the emotions that you're having. If you are experiencing the dark thought side of things that go on with ADHD and grief, please reach out, right? You may have to explain to somebody that you understand that the level of emotions you're feeling is above or stronger than what a neurotypical person might experience. Again, not taking anything away from people who don't have ADHD, it's just a different world. And the sooner that you can do this, the sooner that you can reach out, and the sooner that you can make contact with another human being that's either grieving with you over the same thing or somebody who's completely external, the more impact this is going to have on your grief cycle. And the impact will almost always be positive. For me, one of the big things when processing emotion has always been I need to let myself feel what's going on. Out in the real world, this is not a constructive area to do this, right? You have to understand when and where is a good time to do this. So I generally will do this during a semi-meditative state. I don't even really know what to call it. And I'll go through a process, and it's basically 4 steps. I feel I can process emotions, regardless of what type of emotion it is, better if I just dive right in. Not gonna lie, this is emotionally traumatic at times. It can knock you down a little bit, but I think at the end you understand where you are a lot better, and you understand the way through a lot better. So the first thing I do, music has always been a huge part of my life. I find a song that will draw out the emotion, that will make me feel the situation that I'm in. I put that song on repeat 1 and play it as loud as I can. Purpose of that for my brain, I don't know if it works for everybody else, my brain will then be able to remove the song. So the song will have worked to cue the emotional side that I want to experience, and then it will disappear. Because it's on repeat 1, it's taking all the other sound around me with it. That leaves the sound non-existent. For some, I guess it would just become noise. Let me know in the comments down below how you experience this, because I obviously have my own reaction, but I don't know how this plays out for everybody else. The next step I do is turn the lights off. What I essentially want to do is remove any stimulus from the environment. Almost like a sensory deprivation type of a feeling is what I'm going for. Obviously, we don't all have sensory deprivation tanks in our house. If you do, but not me. And then I sit down and I begin to look at and process the emotions that I'm feeling right now, at the level that I've been feeling them through this entire process. This can take a little bit of time before you reach kind of a solace or a status quo with these emotions, and you understand the reaction that you're having. Then I tend to give myself scenarios, imagine scenarios that will result in a massively heightened emotional reaction to a situation. These are often not pretty, but it allows me to understand where the maximum in the scale of emotion actually is. Then I try to think back in history to times where I've experienced a similar emotion and what I deem to be an appropriate response to that emotion. And with these 3 points of information, I can see what the delta, what the difference is between what I deem to be a normal response, where I am right now, and what the most extreme is. This, when I come out of it, it usually takes about an hour, and you're an emotional mess. It's just the way it is. But I often feel like now I understand what I'm feeling, why I'm feeling it, and how I should work with it much better than I did when I started. And that's very important. I guess the number one takeaway from this video is that there's no right way to grieve. Every way that you are experiencing this loss is normal. And it should definitely be normal. There are aspects that ADHD is going to play into this. It's important that we recognize those. It's important that we protect the relationships that we have with the people around us. And part of that is understanding that occasionally the reactions that our brain gives us are not at a level that they should be. At some point, this is just going to be another entry in the list of things you thought would end you. You will survive this. You will get through it. Grief sucks. I want to thank you for joining me on Engineering ADHD. I hope you learned something today. And remember, there will always be someone who doesn't understand the unique gifts of your mind. Don't let that person be you.